The scent of jasmine and baked bread hung thick in the air as Yara knelt down to retrieve a napkin that had floated near the edge of the fountain. The courtyard buzzed with music, soft lanterns glowed above, and guests twirled across the stone dance floor like petals caught in a breeze. But in that one moment, Yara felt like a weed in a field of roses. She didn't expect praise, didn't crave applause, but she hadn't prepared for humiliation either. "She looks like she works here," a voice cut through the music like a cracked plate. Sharp. Icy. Mocking. Yara froze, her hand still stretched toward the napkin, fingers trembling just slightly. She didn't need to look up to recognize the voice. It belonged to Theo, her cousin Aiden's childhood friend, always smug, always overdressed and underkind. She had last seen him a few years back at a family gathering, where he'd complained that her cookies tasted too earnest. "Maybe she should work here," another voice chimed in with a snort. This one was unmistakable, Great Aunt Mina, the matriarch of side eyes and sideways compliments. She laughed like she'd just cracked the world's cleverest joke, a high, cackling wheeze that turned heads and twisted guts. Yara slowly curled her hand around the napkin, the thin paper crinkling under her grip. Her dress, charcoal gray, loose at the seams, suddenly felt too tight. Her shoes, old leather flats she'd polished 3 nights ago, might as well have been muddy sneakers. Her chest tightened with the heat of invisible fire. She was burning, but no one seemed to notice. No one except her. The world didn't pause for her shame. The quartet continued their smooth jazz as champagne glasses clinked, laughter bubbled, and guests danced beneath the garden archways. But Yara's world had narrowed. Everything slowed down, the pulse in her ears louder than the music, the voices louder than her breath. She stood up carefully, not wanting to draw attention, even though all of it already felt squarely on her back. A server with a tray passed by, and Yara caught her own reflection in a glint of the polished silver, hair frizzing from humidity, a faint smudge on her wrist from earlier when she'd rushed to set up the dessert table, and beneath her eyes, a tiredness that no makeup could hide. She didn't look like a guest. She looked like someone who had stumbled in through the back door. She hadn't bought a new dress. Couldn't afford to. Every cent she'd saved over the last 10 months had gone into making her brother Aiden's engagement party magical. The venue, the food, the lighting, all of it. She had told people she helped a little, but the truth was, she'd nearly emptied her bank account to make it happen. Her son, Milo, had asked if they could still go to the Science Museum for his birthday this year. She had said, "Maybe next time, baby." Because there had been no money for both. Aiden hadn't asked for her help outright, but he didn't refuse it either. And Yara, well, she didn't wait to be asked. That's who she was. The problem solver. The fixer. The background character making sure the main cast sparkled. And now, standing among flickering lights and polished people, she felt like the stagehand who'd stepped onto the stage by accident. Her hand reached for another cup near a gift bag, forcing a blank expression onto her face. She wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not tonight. Not in front of the very people who laughed like she was invisible. She scanned the room, trying to distract herself. Aiden was at the far end, deep in conversation with his fiancée Layla's family. The two of them looked like a catalog couple, he in a tailored navy suit, she in a gold-embroidered gown that shimmered like starlight. Yara smiled faintly, despite everything. They looked happy. That had been the point, hadn't it? To make everything perfect for them? Behind the table, Milo sat quietly, swinging his legs and munching on a mini quiche. His big brown eyes found hers. He didn't smile, just looked at her, really looked. It made her flinch inside. She turned away, trying to focus on organizing the empty plates. They didn't know what she had done. No one knew about the extra shifts she picked up, designing floral arrangements late into the night, scrolling through wedding forums for cost-saving hacks. No one had seen her scraping old wax off borrowed candles or sewing the curtain tiebacks by hand. They saw the finished picture, but not the frame she held up with bleeding fingers. She inhaled slowly, letting the air settle in her lungs like dust on a forgotten shelf. She didn't need to be thanked. She didn't need to be seen. That's what she kept telling herself. But as she turned to stack a few fallen napkins, her gaze returned to Milo. Still watching. Still serious. And what Yara didn't know, what no one in that courtyard suspected, was that an 8-year-old boy in a clip-on tie and grass-stained sneakers had heard every word spoken. And what he was about to do next would change the course of the evening. And of her life. The sun had barely peeked over the rooftops when Yara parked her rusted hatchback behind the garden venue, its rear bumper rattling with every bump in the gravel path. Milo was still half asleep in the back seat, his head tilted sideways on a makeshift pillow, a rolled-up hoodie, and a slightly crumpled juice box resting between his fingers. She reached into the back, gently tugging the hood of his jacket over his ears. "Stay in the car for just a few minutes, baby," she whispered. "I'll come get you soon." He mumbled something that sounded like okay, and rolled back over. The morning air bit at her skin as she stepped outside, arms full of fabric swatches, a binder bulging with timelines and checklists tucked beneath her elbow. The venue courtyard, now silent and echoing with empty space, would by sundown be filled with clinking glasses and fairy lights. But right now, it was hers. It was her canvas. And she was the one holding the paintbrush. For the last 6 months, Yara had lived and breathed this party. Not because she wanted praise, but because she couldn't help it. Planning was her comfort zone. Organizing, budgeting, executing, she thrived in the silence of early mornings and the solitude of lists. Aiden, her younger brother, had always been the dreamer. She was the one who made those dreams feel possible. They had grown up close. 2 branches from the same crooked tree. Their mother, Naima, had worked long shifts in the laundry rooms of upscale hotels, leaving Yara to raise Aiden through most of his childhood. She taught him how to make eggs without burning the pan, iron a shirt properly, and calm his nerves before a math test. She had been more sister than mother, but more mother than anyone else. So when he told her Layla's family had a certain standard in mind, something sophisticated and tasteful, Yara said, "Don't worry about it. I've got it covered." What she didn't say was, "I'll give up what I've been saving for a better apartment." Or, "I'll make it happen even if it breaks me a little." She just smiled and got to work. At her office job, she took shorter lunch breaks to research vendors. On weekends, she played florist, arranging centerpieces with faux peonies, eucalyptus, and ribbon-covered wire she bought in bulk. Her own apartment was full of storage bins labeled linens and candles instead of decorations or cozy comforts. Milo had long since accepted that his mother was always building something for someone else. Still, every once in a while, he'd ask when they could have something nice for them. "After this," she'd say. Always after this. Back at the venue, she unfurled table runners one by one, brushing creases out with her palm. She greeted the rental delivery guys with coffee she'd brought from home. She helped the string quartet set up chairs. When the bakery arrived with a 2-tier cake and minor damage to the fondant, she patched it up with icing she'd stashed in a cooler, because she anticipated problems before they happened. That was Yara's gift, invisibility through competence. When you did everything right, no one noticed. No one had to. By the time guests started arriving that evening, dressed in linen suits and flowing pastels, the courtyard was glowing. Golden lights blinked above. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh lavender and cinnamon. The dessert table stood perfectly symmetrical. Everyone marveled at the ambience. "Looks like a magazine," someone said. "Wow, Layla's family really went all out," another whispered. Yara said nothing. She sat near the back with Milo, who had traded his sneakers for slightly too small loafers. He looked charming in his button-down shirt, the sleeves slightly rumpled from their rushed mourning. She fussed with his collar while watching Aiden escort Layla toward the head table, their smiles so wide they looked drawn from storybooks. Yara smiled too. Genuinely. Because that's what she wanted, for them to shine. She didn't wear sequins like the others. Her dress was 5 years old, hemmed once at home, its zipper stiff and temperamental. She wore earrings from the clearance bin and makeup she applied using a cracked mirror in the car. She didn't look glamorous. But she looked steady. Grounded. Milo leaned into her shoulder, nibbling on a cracker. "Are you happy now, Mama?" he asked in a whisper. She nodded. "I am." At that moment, it was true. But as the night wore on and the jokes from Theo and Great Aunt Mina landed like slaps, the truth became harder to hold on to. Back at their table, Milo had gone quiet. Yara hadn't noticed it at first, too distracted trying not to let the sharp sting of their words draw blood. She busied herself picking up stray napkins and empty glasses from a table no one was sitting at anymore. She kept her gaze down. She told herself it didn't matter. She was used to being in the background. She'd been in the background her whole life. The helper. The fixer. The afterthought. And maybe that was why it hurt so much when people laughed without knowing what they were laughing at. Maybe that was why her chest burned when she heard the words, "She looks like she works here," and realized that maybe, just maybe, everyone else thought the same. It wasn't about vanity. It wasn't even about being thanked. It was about the ache of never being seen. Not really. That's when Milo tugged on her sleeve. His face was pale, brows furrowed in a way far too serious for an 8-year-old. Mom. He began, hesitating. What is it, baby? He opened his mouth. Closed it again. Then just whispered, nothing. She smiled at him, soft and tired. Go play near the fountain, okay? Just don't get your shoes wet. He nodded, but didn't go. Instead, he kept looking toward the stage. Something in him was building. Something she couldn't name. But soon. She would know. And it would be louder than anything she had ever dared to say. By the time Yara stepped out into the alley beside the courtyard, the warm scent of grilled shrimp and wedding cake was behind her, replaced by damp pavement and the hum of the city. She leaned against the brick wall, letting the cool surface press into her spine. A flickering street lamp overhead cast a jagged shadow across the concrete, as if even the light couldn't fully commit to touching her. She inhaled sharply. The air outside was fresher, cleaner, less saturated with laughter she didn't believe in. But it couldn't clear the lump in her throat. Not after what she'd heard. She looks like she works here. Maybe she should work here. The words looped over and over, cutting through her mind like a jagged glass bottle rolling across a hard floor. Yara knew people like Theo and Aunt Mina didn't mean to destroy. They just didn't care enough to avoid it. And that, perhaps, was worse. To them, she wasn't even important enough to be cruel to on purpose. She was nothing. A backdrop. Her fingers trembled against her dress as she wiped at her face. She wouldn't cry. Not now. Not out here, in the shadows, where the only witness was a rusty dumpster and a poster peeling off the wall behind it. But then the door creaked behind her. Small steps. Soft shoes on damp pavement. Milo. She didn't turn, not right away. She didn't want him to see her this way. But he came anyway, standing beside her in silence. His little gray blazer hung awkwardly on his frame, one button loose, one shoelace trailing. He held his juice pouch like it was a security blanket. Are you sad, Mama? He asked quietly. She took a second to answer. No, she lied. Just tired. He didn't say anything. Just leaned his head gently against her arm. They stood that way for a long moment, the city behind them, the celebration in full swing just beyond the door. And in that shared silence, something shifted. Yara didn't know that Milo had heard the voices. That he had caught the laughter. That he had felt the sting, not just for her, but with her. She didn't know the wheels had already begun turning in his little mind. She straightened, squeezed his shoulder gently. Ready to head back in? Milo nodded but didn't look at her. His eyes were on the string lights filtering through the cracks in the door, the sound of music rising and falling like waves on the other side. When they walked back in, Yara slipped into the shadows, resuming her quiet duty of cleaning and tidying and remaining unnoticed. She worked her way toward the dessert table, collecting empty cupcake wrappers and sticky plates. But Milo didn't follow. She didn't notice it right away. Not until she looked up and saw him, not at their table, not by the fountain, but walking slowly, purposefully, toward the stage. The DJ was mid-song, bobbing his head to a classic love ballad, when Milo reached the edge of the platform. He waited, watching, until the music paused briefly for a toast cue. Then, quick as a breath, he climbed 2 small steps and stood behind the microphone stand. Yara's heart seized. What was he doing? She froze, her hands still gripping a tray of used champagne flutes. Milo, she whispered under her breath, starting to move toward him. But it was too late. He reached up with both hands and tapped the microphone. Tap. Tap. A loud pop burst through the speakers. Conversations halted. The clinking stopped. All heads turned. Even the string quartet paused mid-tune, their bows hovering in midair. The silence that followed was so heavy it could have cracked stone. Milo cleared his throat. Hi, he said, the mic trembling in his hands. My name is Milo. I'm Yara's son. Yara couldn't breathe. She was halfway between the dessert table and the dance floor, paralyzed in place. My mom helped make this whole party, Milo continued, his voice wavering but rising just enough to carry. She paid for the food and the decorations and the lights. She didn't buy herself anything new 'cause she wanted everything to be nice for Uncle Aiden and Miss Layla. Whispers flickered across the room like sparks. She even told me we couldn't do my birthday this year 'cause this party was more important, he said, voice cracking slightly. But she never told anyone she did it. Yara felt the world shift beneath her. Her knees wobbled. Her breath came in short, stuttered bursts. I heard someone say my mom looked like a worker, Milo said, staring directly at the cluster of tables in the middle. But she's not. She's the reason all of you are here. My mom's not a helper. She's a hero. The silence stretched again. Stretched until it hurt. Theo's eyes were wide. Aunt Mina clutched her clutch like a life raft. Aiden had stopped dancing. Layla stood beside him, her mouth slightly open, her hand covering her chest. Milo looked around once more, his little shoulders squared like a soldier. Then, without another word, he handed the microphone back to the stunned DJ, climbed down the steps with quiet dignity, and walked straight toward his mother. Yara fell to her knees before he could reach her. She opened her arms and caught him mid-step, pulling him so tightly into her chest that she could feel his heart racing against hers. "Why did you do that, baby?" she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Because they forgot," he said simply. "And I didn't want them to forget." And in that moment, all the weight she'd carried for years, responsibilities, sacrifices, sleepless nights, lifted, not completely, but enough for her to stand a little taller. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't alone in her truth. Her son had found his voice. And he had used it to give her back hers. The air inside the courtyard had changed. It wasn't just quiet now, it was reverent. Like something sacred had just been spoken, and no one wanted to be the first to break it. Guests who had spent the night chatting, laughing, dancing, now sat motionless in their seats, eyes glued to the woman still kneeling on the mosaic floor, holding her son like he was the only solid thing in the world. Yara's hands gripped Milo's blazer as though it anchored her to earth. She was crying now. The kind of tears she never let herself shed, the ones that come not from pain but from being seen. Really seen. Not as a convenience or a helper. Not as background noise. But as someone who mattered. Milo didn't say another word. He didn't have to. He simply stayed in her arms, his small hand clutched in hers like a silent promise. "I saw what they didn't. And I said what you couldn't." But then, the sound of another microphone clicking on. Yara's head snapped up. All eyes turned. It was Aiden. He stood at the center of the stage, his bow tie askew, one hand holding the mic, the other stuffed nervously into his pocket. Layla stood to the side, her glossy lips parted, her eyes shining with tears that hadn't yet fallen. Aiden looked out over the crowd. Then at Yara. Then down at Milo. He cleared his throat once. Twice. The sound echoed through the stillness like a drum in a canyon. "I don't really know what to say," he started. His voice was raw, barely above a whisper, but the mic caught every word. "Because Milo's right. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the servers froze near the kitchen door, holding trays of sparkling cider and espresso shots like statues caught mid-motion. My sister didn't just help with this party. She made it happen. Every piece of it," Aiden said, sweeping his hand toward the decorated courtyard, the golden lights, the floral arches, the meticulously arranged tables. "She paid for the food. The venue. The chairs you're sitting in. She worked herself ragged to give me and Layla this day. And she never asked for anything in return." Yara's lips trembled. Her fingers dug into the soft fabric of Milo's shoulder. "She never told me no," Aiden continued, his voice cracking. "Even when I didn't ask. Even when I didn't say thank you. Even when I didn't notice." A slow shift began in the crowd. People started lowering their eyes. Napkins were pulled from laps and dabbed at corners of mouths. Great Aunt Mina crossed her arms tightly over her chest, but her jaw twitched. Theo shifted in his seat, looking very small in his expensive suit. "When our mom was working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, it was Yara who raised me. She helped me with schoolwork. Walked me home. Packed lunches when there was barely anything in the fridge," Aiden said. "She was the one who made me believe I could be more than a statistic." Yara's breath hitched. She had almost forgotten those days. When Aiden was little and the world seemed so heavy, she used to whisper in his ear at night, "You're going to be something. I promise." She let me have a childhood, he said. Even when she didn't get one. A sniffle sounded from somewhere in the crowd. A hand reached for a glass of water and stopped halfway. "And tonight someone made her feel small," Aiden said, glancing directly at Theo and then at Mina. "And I should have said something. I should have noticed. I should have told all of you what she gave up." He paused. Took a breath so deep, the microphone caught the rustle of his shirt moving with it. "Shame on us." 3 words. A whisper. A knife. Theo looked like he wanted to disappear into the folds of the tablecloth. Mina's lips thinned into a hard line. "Shame on us," Aiden repeated, softer this time, as if trying to soothe the wound too deep for apologies alone. He turned to face Yara. I'm so sorry, yeah, he said. For every time I took your love for granted. For not seeing how much you gave. And how much it cost you. The tears fell freely down her cheeks now, but she didn't hide them. I love you, Aiden said, voice cracking fully now. And I hope tonight, you finally know, you were never invisible to me. No applause. No cheers. But something better. Silence. Heavy. Sacred. Filled with realization. Then, slowly, people began to stand. One by one. Layla's father, the man who hadn't said more than 3 words to Yara all evening, walked across the courtyard, took her hand, and said, thank you. I didn't know. Another cousin came next, resting a hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry, she said simply. Even Layla herself approached. No words, just a quiet embrace. Yara stayed kneeling, Milo still beside her, but the world around her was no longer above her. It was eye level now. And for the first time in years, people looked at her, not through her. Not past her. At her. And the woman they saw wasn't the one in the clearance rack dress or the scuffed shoes. It wasn't the woman hunched over a clipboard or holding platters in her hands. It was a sister. A mother. A builder. A hero. The reception continued, in some form. The music returned, softer this time. The dancing resumed, gentler. The food kept coming, but with more gratitude than before. People came up to Milo all night, ruffling his hair, giving him high fives, thanking him. Yara watched it all with a kind of stunned quiet. And when Aiden walked over and pulled her into a hug, a real one, tight and trembling, it felt like being wrapped in the childhood they'd both survived. I should have told them, he whispered. I should have told you. It's okay, she replied, the fight gone from her voice. You know now. And that was enough. Because sometimes the healing doesn't come from who hurt you, it comes from who chooses to see you afterward. Later that night, long after the last slice of cake had been served and the lanterns began to flicker lower in their sockets, Yara sat quietly on a bench just beyond the courtyard's archway. The sounds of clinking glasses and fading music echoed behind her, but in her mind, everything was still. Milo sat beside her, feet swinging gently above the stone tiles, his blazer unbuttoned, and the tips of his shirt collar now rumpled from a full evening of well-deserved attention. Every few minutes, another guest would pass by, give him a nod or a kind smile. Some stopped to thank her too, quiet, sincere, sometimes a little awkward, but always genuine. Yara nodded back, murmuring thank you or simply placing a hand over her heart. The gratitude was unfamiliar, like sunlight after years of shade, and she was still learning how to sit in it without flinching. The moment she would remember most came not from a speech or a spotlight, but from something small and soft. Milo leaned against her shoulder, his voice barely above a whisper. Mama. Did I do the right thing? She turned to look at him, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. His eyes, wide, dark, and sincere, searched hers not for approval, but for truth. You did the bravest thing, she said, smiling through tears that no longer felt heavy. And I'll never forget it. He nodded once, like that was all he needed. When they finally made it home, Yara let herself collapse into the worn couch in their small living room. Her navy gray dress still clung to her in creases and sweat, the clip in her hair had slipped halfway down, and her feet ached so badly she kicked off her shoes without a second thought. But none of that mattered. Because for the first time in a very long time, her heart felt full. Not because people clapped. Not because her brother cried. Not even because the guests finally saw her. But because her son had. She'd spent years pouring everything she had into others, into Aiden, into work, into making things beautiful for people who rarely noticed. She gave without question. She gave without credit. And she did it because she loved them. But tonight, someone gave back. And not just anyone, her child. He had watched her. Listened. Absorbed everything she thought she was shielding him from. And when it counted most, he stood up, not with adult anger or resentment, but with childlike honesty and unshakable love. She smiled to herself as she unpinned the flower from her dress and placed it on the coffee table like a relic from a battle won. In the dim light of the room, she noticed something else, a framed photo on the shelf. A younger Yara holding a toddler Aiden in her lap, both grinning, messy, surrounded by birthday balloons. She remembered that day, how she had scraped together enough to throw a party at the park, made cupcakes herself, and borrowed folding chairs from neighbors. No one had helped. No one had clapped. But Aiden had smiled at her like she was the whole world. Just like Milo did tonight. The legacy repeated. Not of thanklessness, but of love so quiet and unassuming that it often went unspoken. Until someone picked up a microphone. She sat back on the couch, her body sinking into its familiar curve. The silence wasn't lonely anymore, it was comforting. Peaceful. Empowering. Tomorrow, life would go back to normal. The office would call. Bills would arrive. Laundry would pile up. And she'd still be who she always was, the one who held things together. But something had changed. Not out there, in here. Inside her. Because now she knew. She was never invisible. She was never just the helper in the background. She had been underestimated. Overlooked. But never unloved. And now, whenever doubt returned, whenever a voice in a room made her shrink or question her place, she'd remember tonight. She'd remember Milo's voice echoing through a courtyard full of strangers, standing on a stage with courage too big for his little shoes. She's not a helper. She's a hero. Yara stood slowly and moved to Milo's room. He was already asleep, arms flung wide across the bed, face peaceful in the soft moonlight. She brushed a kiss across his cheek, then turned off the lamp beside his bed. Before closing the door, she whispered, "Thank you, baby." She returned to the couch and sat in the stillness again, this time like she belonged in her own story. Because she did. The next time someone forgot her worth, she wouldn't have to explain herself. She had a boy who knew where to find the microphone.